We're going to dive a bit deeper into some of the stuck situation Israel find themselves in. And we're going to call this the asymmetric feedback loop. We have this apocalyptic ideology, as we talked about, that drives the resistance axis. It holds its own people hostage and is posing an existential threat to Israel. But that raises a massive question, well, for me at least, which is, if this ideology is this dangerous and Israel has known about it for years and they had this doctrine of preemption, why didn't Israel do something about it? Why did Israel tolerate it for so long? And I'm thinking specifically here about Hamas, Hezbollah, the arsenal of rockets. If preemption's the rule, why the hesitation? Why didn't they act sooner? Not preempting things like that causes things to grow big, and it actually ends up hurting more people. It actually makes the fallout far worse. And as we've seen, it's been horrific. And that's because it's been allowed to build up. That's a fundamental question. If preemption is the rule, why the hesitation? And it brings us to the agonizing reality of what we are calling the asymmetric feedback loop. It's about looking at the day after. You know, the Israeli military planners and politicians are not operating in a vacuum. They know exactly what a full-scale root and branch removal of Hamas would cost. First, it meant, as we've seen, heavy, brutal urban warfare in one of the most densely populated places on earth. Hundreds of Israeli soldiers coming home in body bags, massive civilian casualties, and they're going to trigger devastating international diplomatic backlash and potential sanctions. And all of this is terrible. But the biggest fear was the day after, as we were saying, what comes next. So the ultimate deterrent was the governance void. If Israel goes in and completely topples Hamas government, destroys their police force, dismantles their civic administration, who governs Gaza the day after? If they break it, they buy it, they inherit the governance. They have to feed the people, they have to police the people, they have to take care of the healthcare. Over 2 million civilians there, and they're deeply hostile. So they would essentially have to occupy Gaza again, establish a military government, and Israel actually withdrew every single soldier and civilian from Gaza back in 2005, precisely to avoid becoming stuck with the bleeding sore that exact scenario is. Because we've seen what happens when governance collapses. History tells us Iraq, elsewhere, power vacuums, insurgencies, the rise of groups like ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood. These people taking over is a nightmare, and Israel did not want that inside their borders with Hamas. That's just not sustainable. That's extremely dangerous. So for years, when faced with the choice between, to be honest, probably the only choice they had when you look at it all, full reoccupation and managing the threat. The status quo looked like the lesser of two evils, a bit like the Temple Mount situation. It's not peace at all up there, even though it's peaceful. It's just this ongoing tension that somehow holds as long as no one tips it over the edge. So they relied on a combination of periodic, limited military operations to degrade Hamas's capabilities, economic levers, and the technological miracle of the Iron Dome. They've been intercepting rockets for years. They're well versed at this. They know what they're up against here, and they've built systems to combat that daily threat. And they convinced themselves that Hamas could be deterred, I suppose. They thought, okay, Hamas governs now. They've got something to lose if you govern a people. You're not going to risk total destruction. And again, it's another form of this inattentional blindness that we've talked about before. But then October the 7th happened, and October the 7th utterly shattered the concept of containment, just like in 1973, shattered the illusion of invincibility. October the 7th proved in the most unimaginable and in the most terrific way to the Israeli public that the containment was actually a lethal illusion. You can't contain apocalyptic ideology.